This is kind of like a prayer going out to all the peeps close to me and dear to blessings God has given me, and I want to repay it to you like this. Clap your hands. Everybody clap your hands. Introducing. This is the joint where we give shout outs to all the peeps, you know what I'm saying? You know we couldn't do this joint without spreading some love to the ones. Yo, check it. Clear. If I just ruled the world, I would give y'all everything. Yes, we going out.
All right.
We going out just like that.
All right, I'm back. Y'all. Hope everybody's having a good afternoon in the EU, a good morning in the US, and I hope everybody's doing well. I know it's been some funny weather patterns lately, and funny, not even just funny, but it's been a lot of natural, you could say, disasters going on in the US right now. Fires everywhere, not everywhere, but primarily the west and midwest areas. Then there's been flooding, the eastern side, center, flooding on the eastern southern tip as usual. Hurricanes, this kind of thing. So I hope everybody's been safe, and I hope everybody's been coping well. But check this out. It occurred to me that in history, it occurred to me along the lines of the conversation regarding Kamala Harris and her ethnicity, because that's been a really big hot topic right now. And I believe it's more of a GOP talking point, like, because I just got to be honest with you. I never thought I wasn't even curious myself. It never popped in my head to even wonder what her ethnicity was, um, or race for that matter, right? And yeah, but somehow we find ourselves talking about that in the election cycle, and it just made me realize that it's largely people who do not like the Democratic Party. I'm not saying not only. I'm saying largely. Okay, so that leaves some that leaves some room for other views too, as well, right? But it occurred to me that the people who brought this conversation up about Kamala Harris's race or ethnicity, they tend to be people that right now have a political issue or a political problem or wish to express political dissent against the Democratic Party, who are maybe not only black now, because Trump ain't black, and Trump brings it up for some reason. Like it's an issue for him, and I don't really think it's an issue for him. I think it's just something he's capitalizing on at the moment politically. So he wants to have that conversation. But, oh, 2 seconds, y'all. Hold on 2 seconds. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. Right, I'm back now. Sorry about that. I just had to get something straight here. But right. Now, in reference to Kamala Harris's ethnicity, um it's come up in this election cycle, which shows you how important it is or unimportant it is, because outside of the election cycle, people still doing stuff, you're still going to work, she's still going to work, doing stuff every day of the week. Even if I don't know what you do for work, I don't know what your day is like. People don't know what Kamala Harris's day is like, but somehow her identity, her ethnic and racial identity has come into play during the election cycle. And you find people like Trump who suddenly are interested in the topic. And then, so this has gone on for a couple of weeks. It's really been a talking point for the GOP. Um, and so we're going to talk about it. But if we're going to talk about it, let's do a really loving and caring job, but also let's show how knowledgeable we are. We really are on the topic because it behooves us to pass on knowledge and facts to young folk. I'm 55 myself. I'm from Washington D.C. So, for me, that you grow up with people with different ethnicities, but a lot of times we take it for granted because it is often a social construct. You know, ethnicity is a social construct. Race, it's a social construct. Um, but they are tools also that we use to navigate certain circumstances that are very important because politics is very important and racism is a very serious issue in the United States of America. It's a very serious issue in America, South America, Central America. It's a core feature of history in America, Europe, across the world. So when we're dealing with politics, we need to get it right. And there's always people that are developing their knowledge along the way. So I decided to flip it. This is just an example that I'm going to give. It's not the only example. There's millions of living examples out there. A lot of times those examples are around you and we don't even ask. Like, for example, somebody, you could find a person of Dominican who's Dominican, and for all intents and purposes, you might identify as black. You may see them, they may look just like you, and you might be losing your mind and saying, why the hell is this person ignoring the fact that they're black? Well, those are one of the examples, right? It could go that way too. It could be a person that looks like that, that's ignoring the fact that there's implications to them not being black, that there's some strangeness in that. So, but it's just an example. There's millions of uh, positive and negative examples of how this works in our society. But I think a lot of times we take it for granted because we've been the benefactors of some good things. We've been the benefactors of the civil rights era. We've been the benefactors of coming through a process where now we're educators. Now we're not just graduating from a university and not being allowed to be teachers. Now we are teachers. For example, in my pop's generation, you could graduate from Howard University. They even had a brown bag rule there. That's what they say. That's what they call it. If you are a darker than a brown bag, they wouldn't let you in. That's what they used to say about Howard University. I don't know how accurate that always has been, but that's what they used to say in the turn of the century. Now the thing is that even then, if you graduated from Howard University, and you got a professorship, a lot of times you weren't allowed to teach in any universities, right? Because racism was still real. Um, so, there were some contradictions, and now we've broken through that. Now there are black professors in universities around the world. Also, not only around the world, but more specifically in the United States at different colleges, not only black colleges, not only, you see what I mean? So there's been a little bit of progress, although there's a long way to go. So here's my example. It just occurred to me that one of the founders of the NAACP was a man by the name of Walter White, right? And he has a really interesting story. So I'm going to bring this up here. He has a really, really interesting story. I don't know if you could see this, but this is Walter White here, right? On the right. It's a black and white photo. And now I went online. I liked this little short. This is a 9-minute short about Walter White's life. Um, and he was a member of the NAACP. But what makes him, what makes his story really interesting is that this man identified as black. He identified as black, yo. The man identified as black. Walter
So
White.
blonde haired and
You see, this man right here identified as black, and his name was Walter White. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with folks. Now, I'm gonna let this video play, and then we're going to do a little background on him and some fact checking, and then I'm going to be out. But again, this is about and this is about race and ethnic identity and how they're not necessarily finite. Like the rules and the laws in your neighborhood, in your town, in your state, or in your experience might not be finite around these terms. They may have slight nuances that are a little different. And for example, I'll give you one last example. In America, in the United States of America, they practice the one drop rule. That was a rule. Walter White fell under that rule. You see? But that's not the case for every country in the world when it's regarding the history with racial discrimination. So it's very important that we understand that context when we're talking about race in the United States of America. Even when we're talking about race, when somebody like Donald Trump brings it up, we want to let people like Donald Trump know we ain't goddamn fools. We know the history. We're not going to be led astray by somebody who's speaking superficially for self interest on these topics. We want the conversation to be useful for all. We want it to be factual for all because we're not playing games. We don't want somebody looking at us and taking advantage of us and saying, hey, they'll just take a handout because they're stupid anyway. No, we don't want that. We just want to be respected for the work we actually put in. We don't want to be given anything. Keep that in mind. Reparations is not giving us a goddamn thing. It's paying us what you owe in blood, in slavery. Okay, so it behooves us, those whose families actually are a part of that, slavery in America, the foundings of the country, War of Independence, Civil War, it behooves us to get the facts straight so we don't have some of us making a goddamn fool out of ourselves. So here's Walter White. I'm gonna let it play and make a little bit of commentary here and there. So here we go. Oh, let me drop the link of the video also. I thought this young lady, I don't know who she is, but I listened to a few of these short bios on him, and I thought hers was pretty good. So I just ran with hers at the moment. So here we go.
and blue eyed. Although blonde-haired and blue-eyed, Walter Francis White spent his life fighting for the rights of his black heritage. While others passed into white America for safety and comfort, Walter passed as white to bring justice. He became known as Mr. NAACP, working with the association for over 30 years. He investigated lynchings and race riots around the U.S., walked the halls of Congress, and sat with presidents. Throughout his lifetime, Walter White took a stand for racial equality and the advancement of African Americans, helping launch the modern civil rights movement. Walter Francis White was born on July 1st, 1892, the fourth of 7 children. His parents, George and Madeline, grew up during the time of Reconstruction. In this environment, blacks struggled as they learned new skills outside of farming or housework. Most survived by sharecropping, but a few gained opportunities to provide something better for their families. This was true of Walter's parents, who both attended Atlanta University before starting a family. His father became a postal worker and his mother a teacher.
All right, let me just look that up. He attended Atlanta University. Let me just see something. Let me just double check something here. Was Atlanta University a black university? A black only? Let me see here. I mean, it's pretty. I'm pretty sure about that, but yes, it was. Okay, so the man went to a blacks only, or his parents. Did they say his parents or him? Hold on, let me see something.
For their families. In this environment, blacks struggled as they learned new skills outside of farming or housework. Most survived by sharecropping, but a few gained opportunities to provide something better for their families. This was true of Walter's parents, who both attended Atlanta University before starting a family.
Now you understand this. Now see, his parents attended a Negro only university, Atlanta University. Check it out. But here we're talking about Walter White, their son, right? And I believe his parents were of maybe biracial or multi ethnic descent. But in those times, when they walked down the street, you could see the Negro on them. Uh, Excuse the term, but you could see the Negro on them. So in that time, with that one drop rule, that meant your black ass could get lynched, murdered, raped, and you would not, your word didn't count for shit any day of the week. So when you look a certain kind of way and you get an opportunity to go to a university, in this day, if you looked any bit of black, you're not getting into the white university, into other universities. You can go to the Negro only university. You wouldn't be allowed to go to the whites only, the Caucasian only university. So just to give you some background.
His father became a postal worker and his mother a teacher. Walter's childhood was stable and he was raised on the Christian principle of the Golden Rule. On September 24th, 1906, when Walter was 14, he and his father were on their way home from work when they saw a mob of white men starting to gather. After nightfall, the mob approached their home. His father positioned himself and Walter at the front windows with guns. Before the mob reached their house, Walter's father told him, "Son, don't shoot until the first man puts his foot on the lawn, and then don't you miss."
Now you see, we're talking about race and ethnicity and how they're not always fluid. So in your personal experience, it may be a particular type of way, but to the next person, their personal experience may be slightly different, although largely the same. So this is what fluid means. It's not finite all the time. It's never been applied finite all the time, and that's part of the education and the knowledge we need to pass on so we can navigate these conversations on people like Kamala Harris, by the way, or or a whole lot of other people too. That it could be the other way around. It could be somebody's passing for white and you don't know who they are, who their background is. It could be that. And listen, we're about to find out.
Thankfully, neighbors fired at the mob, causing them to flee without Walter or his father shooting. This thing till the first before the mob reached their house, Walter's father told him, "Son, don't shoot until the first man puts his foot on the lawn, and then don't you miss." Thankfully, neighbors fired at the mob, causing them to flee without Walter or his father shooting. This harrowing incident happened during what became known as the Atlanta race riots, but it was not the only racial violence Walter experienced that late September. While riding down Peachtree Street with his father, Walter saw a disabled black man trying to outrun a mob. When the mob caught up to the man, they surrounded him and beat him until he died. Horrified, they watched the group of whites move on to find another target. Witnessing such traumatic events made Walter resolve to take a stand. During his teens and 20s, Walter attended Atlanta University, a historically black school which served as both a high school and college. The Atlanta Board of Education had decided to eliminate upper grades for all blacks in the city, so Walter grew up not being allowed to attend white schools. The unjust Jim Crow laws forced blacks not being allowed to attend white schools. and college. The Atlanta Board of Education had decided to eliminate upper grades for all blacks in the city, so Walter grew up not being allowed to attend white schools. The unjust Jim Crow laws forced blacks into segregation. Walter was not able to eat at certain restaurants, live in certain neighborhoods, sit in sections specified for whites at theaters, or even drink from certain water fountains. He experienced all of the negative results of a segregated South, even though he had blonde hair and blue eyes and was less than 1/8 African descent.
Now, 1/8 African descent, but by law he was black, and not just by law, by societal rules and norms, he was black. If he went, um, if he wanted to walk down the street with his parents, or go to a restaurant, or go to a university, it had to be the black university, the segregated university. Now, it is just so, it's hard to imagine that at times, because times have changed a little bit, but not that much. And on top of it, we find ourselves still having these kind of conversations where historical context and practical context is removed from the conversation, where we begin to communicate like everyone's experience is finite in blackness or in whiteness or in whatever is you want to be. It's not really the case, but let's see here.
After graduating from Atlanta University, Walter continued to feel drawn to advocacy. When the Atlanta Board of Education decided in 1917 to eliminate the seventh grade in all black schools, he was chosen by community leaders to help write a petition to the board and to write an all-important letter to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in New York for assistance standing against the school board's actions. As a result of his work, the Board of Education's plan was struck down, and Walter's desire for taking a stand was fueled. The letter Walter sent to the fledgling NAACP asking for help caught the attention of James Weldon Johnson, then field secretary, convincing him to assist with starting a branch in Atlanta. On behalf of the NAACP's new Atlanta branch, Walter began investigating lynchings throughout the South.
Now, I'm just going to pause this because they mentioned um, this brother right here. He wrote a book. And his book,
NAACP asking for help
hold on.
caught of education standing against the school board's actions. As a result of his work, the Board of Education's plan was struck down, and Walter's desire for taking a stand was fueled. The letter Walter sent to the fledgling NAACP asking for help caught the attention of
James Weldon Johnson. Now, James Weldon Johnson wrote the National Black Anthem, which in some cities and towns kids sing in school, grade school, and things like this. Um, Let me see. Damn, can I remember it? Well, I mean, we used to have to sing this. It's so ironic because in my grade school, uh, well, the middle part of it, all the kids had to sing the you had to sit while, or and sing if you want, while the national anthem was being played and the national black anthem. And the national black anthem is actually a very beautiful song, but he also wrote a book called, I believe it's Diary of an Ex-Colored Man, something like that. I believe I've read the book, but I just can't remember the name exactly. But it's a very, really interesting look into the turn of the century and race and politics and these kind of things. So if you haven't read that book, check it out. But in any case,
James Weldon Johnson, then field secretary, convincing him to assist with starting a branch in Atlanta. On behalf of the NAACP's new Atlanta branch, Walter began investigating lynchings throughout the South. His fair complexion allowed him to pass as white, so he was able to go undercover. Hesitantly, Walter accepted Mr. Johnson's invitation to work at the headquarters of the NAACP in New York City in January 1918. Just 12 days after moving to New York, Walter was sent to Estill Springs, Tennessee, to investigate a particularly horrible lynching where Jim McElhearn, a sharecropper, was burned at the stake after he defended himself from a beating by his landlord. a small backwoods community that only received news from the outside world by weekly newspaper. Walter found that the locals congregated at the only country store. Because he was not well known, Walter was able to pass as white, interact with locals, and obtain inside information about lynchings. He conversed with them about a variety of things, but when they would start talking about the lynching, he intentionally acted disinterested, changing the subject to politics, the weather, or even cotton raising. This seemed to have the opposite effect, causing the locals to insist on him hearing their stories. He exercised caution and tact as he carefully uncovered the details surrounding the murder of the African American farmer. Under the guise of being a prospective land buyer, Walter was able to blend in, and they never realized he was an undercover Negro. Without them realizing it, using their pride as a weapon against them, Walter fooled these men into giving away information that condemned themselves. Though they were not
Now, undercover Negro. According to the law of the United States of America at this time, it was the one drop rule. So that means if they could find out that you were black in any way, shape, or form, meaning if you had a sister that looked black, if you had a parent that looked black, or if not even that, if you had a sister or a parent that didn't look white and they found out about it, you could have problems. You see, you would have problems because, again, this is mandated by law. You have to understand that there was no compromising in this situation. Everyone was made to go along with the rules under threat of punishment. You see? So your life was going to be guided by these parameters, whether you liked it, agreed with it, or not, just like you live today. Even though the rules are a little bit of difference today, you got a little breathing room today to be able to make something a little better for yourself. You still live under the rules, and they lived under the rules then too in the 19th, in the turn of the century, 1900s, the beginning of the 1900s. There's not much you could do. You had to act under the rules.
not charged or convicted of it. Without them realizing it, using their pride as a weapon against them, Walter fooled these men into giving away information that condemned themselves. Though they were not charged or convicted of any crime in court, Walter's stand against these vicious acts built the momentum towards establishing anti-lynching laws in the United States. In the early 1920s, Walter went to investigate a triple lynching near Aiken, South Carolina. The trio, by the last name of Lohman, had been wrongly accused of murder and were given the death penalty in a courtroom filled with Klansmen. Their lawyer, a local white man known for defending African Americans in trial, concluded that not only were the Lohmans innocent, but that some of the testimonies clearly pointed towards local, prominent white men. It sounds like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, but this story was sadly not fiction. During the night, a mob removed the three from the jail, took them to the outskirts of town, told them to run, and shot them down in a rain of bullets as they fled for their lives. When Walter went to investigate, the lawyer freely gave him the names of the ringleaders and of another man from a nearby town who could give him information. This ex-Klansman gave Walter many details, and over the next 3 days, Walter pieced together the entire story about that terrible triple lynching. It served to continue motivating Walter to take his stand against such brutality. In 1931, when James Weldon Johnson stepped down as secretary of the NAACP, White was elected to replace him. He still continued his important work, but now with more responsibility and publicity. For 3 decades, Mr. White fearlessly exposed the racial injustice faced by Black Americans. The tragedy of lynchings, while diminished as a result of Walter's work, did not cease altogether. From a high of 83 lynchings at the beginning of his career to only 3 the year of his death, clearly his efforts had a major impact. As executive secretary of the NAACP, White pushed for federal anti-lynching laws. He oversaw the drafting of the bills and used his lobbying skills to get influential politicians to support them. Walter became a passionate advocate for genuine equality among all Americans, as he took a stand against racial injustice. He was gaining influence in Washington, D.C., and was becoming a power broker to promote the agenda of the NAACP. In the 1940s, Walter built strong relationships with both President and Mrs. Roosevelt. At White's urging, President Roosevelt issued an executive order in 1941, providing for the formation of a Fair Employment Practices Committee. Mrs. Roosevelt joined the NAACP Board of Directors in 1945 after her husband died. Then, President Harry S. Truman quickly became whites' friend and ally in the movement for equal rights, publicly supporting the NAACP agenda.
Our immediate task is to remove the last remnants of the barriers which stand between millions of our citizens and their birthright. There is no justifiable reason for discrimination because of ancestry or religion or race or color.
Now, I'm going to stop this video here. I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time. This video was done by Daniel Wright. As a matter of fact, I'm going to subscribe. It's only got 221 subscribers, but I was thoroughly impressed with this video. So, Daniel, if you hear this, great job. You should be proud of yourself. And you've done something that many, you know, possibly choose not to do. I don't know how old Daniel is. He sounded like a young man when he did this, but the video has 29,000 views and 900 likes. And that's that's a lot more than I get. And that's a lot more than a lot of the people that I talk to often on the net get. You have to be you have to produce a really good product and be consistent to get to that level. So kudos to you. Now, that was a demonstration of the fluidity of blackness, right? And as an ethnicity or a race, right? Now let me pull out of here and let me go to Chat GDP. Now let me see here. I'm going to pull Chat GDP up. Let me see. And let's see here. Share screen. Right. And then I'm going to put this question in the chat because this is regarding human and civil rights, this topic, right? And when we're talking about human and civil rights, it's important for us to understand that that is uh, the context when people are discussing what Kamala Harris's ethnicity is. It's the context of human and civil rights that we're discussing, right? And how it actually works in reality. Now, let me see something here. Right. Okay. So let me put this in the chat just to make sure I get this right here. Regarding human and civil rights in practical terms, regarding combating racism combating racism combating racism is black considered an ethnicity or a race? Now, again, we're talking about human and civil rights terms, right? So we can get some clarity about how it works so that we don't get so easily confused or duped in the conversation, so that we represent ourselves well and thoroughly when we discussing these topics. And so, yeah, it's very necessary. Now, here's the question. It's regarding race and ethnicity. The question was regarding human and civil rights in practical terms. Oh, let me close that one down. Oh, did I right? Okay, yeah. Here's the question. I'm sorry. Regarding human and civil rights in practical terms. Uh, no, I'm sorry. Regarding human and civil rights in practical terms. Regarding combating racism, is black considered an ethnicity or race? Is black considered ethnicity or race? in human and civil rights in combating racism.
In practical terms related to combating racism and discussing human and civil rights, Black is typically considered a race rather than an ethnicity. Here's a detailed explanation. Race versus ethnicity. Race refers to a classification of humans based on shared physical or social qualities into categories generally viewed as distinct by society. In the context of combating racism, Black is used to denote people of African descent who share common physical characteristics such as skin color. The concept of race is often used to address systemic and institutionalized discrimination and inequalities. Ethnicity refers to shared cultural traits, such as language, ancestry, practices, and beliefs. Ethnicity is more about cultural identity than physical characteristics. For example, within the Black race, there are numerous ethnicities, such as African American, Jamaican, Nigerian, Ethiopian, etc. Practical implications in combating racism. Legal and social frameworks. In many countries, including the United States, anti-discrimination laws and civil rights protections often refer to race as a key category. This includes the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the US, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Policy and advocacy. Organizations and movements aimed at combating racism, such as the NAACP or Black Lives Matter, focus on race as a primary category to address systemic inequities, police brutality, economic disparities, and other forms of racial discrimination. Data collection and analysis. For purposes of studying social inequalities, public health disparities, and other issues, data is often collected based on racial categories. This helps identify and address the specific challenges faced by Black people as a racial group. Intersectionality. Complex identities. While Black is considered a race, individuals' experiences of racism can be influenced by their ethnicity, nationality, gender, and other aspects of identity. For example, an African American might face different forms of discrimination compared to a Black immigrant from Haiti or a Black person from the UK. Holistic approaches. Effective anti-racism work often considers both race and ethnicity to understand and address the full scope of discrimination and inequality. Conclusion. In summary, in the context of combating racism and discussing human and civil rights, Black is primarily considered a race. This classification helps to address broad systemic issues and policies related to racial discrimination, while recognizing the diverse ethnic identities within the Black race can further enhance understanding and action against racism.
Right. Primarily is the key and operative word. Primarily, not exclusively. And I think Walter White, one of the founders of the NAACP, and his story, it keeps that in mind. And we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about race or ethnicity, identity, whether we're talking to a Jamaican when he says or she says Black, whether we're talking about an African American when he or she says they're Black, when we're talking about an African when he or she says they're Black. What does it exactly mean? See, there's nuances when we're using these terms. So we need to be cautious because even within this dynamic of race, even within this dynamic of ethnicity, your experience in those may not actually be finite to all people, even within your race or in your ethnicity. You get what I'm saying? I hope you hear me loud and clear, because when we're talking about who we're voting for, when we're talking and debating to the world while the world is listening and everybody else is listening to us, it behooves us to know what the hell we're talking about. It behooves us because the more we know what the hell we're talking about, the closer we're going to get to our goals, because people will then take us very, very seriously instead of just a little. You see what I'm saying? There's a difference in the outcome when people take you very, very seriously because of your knowledge and because you have expressed a desire to know these specifics, you tend to get what you want faster than when you exhibit behavior that shows, yeah, you're not really totally got your head wrapped around the topic yet. You see what I'm saying? I hope you do. Now, so when we're dealing with this topic, there doesn't need to be unilateral understanding or agreement. Not unilateral, not 100% to make it right, necessary, or true. We need a little, just, 80, 60, 70%, whatever, it just needs to be enough. And the reason why the laws are written this way and the effect of it, the reason why the laws are written this way is so that people are and experiences are not excluded, because it's about all people's human and civil rights, not just some, right? So, in practical terms, when we're discussing these matters, we need to understand that within that blackness, it is not one exclusive experience. And we also need to navigate using that language. And it can be difficult because when a person is using race or using the word black to describe their race, and then another person, they're just saying black, 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 and you don't know they're describing their race, race, race. You think they're describing their ethnicity, ethnicity, ethnicity. People get confused in that conversation. But it is true. It is not, it is fluid. It can be both. Now let me see here. Let me just make sure I'm not missing something. And these are all things that I research. When I'm speaking about this, I'm researching it. Now, let me see here. An example for an African American. There's another example. Let's say when you talk about blackness, because it works both ways. You can be concerned or may not identify with Kamala Harris's blackness, and you could even say no, 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 she ain't black, she ain't black. Right? You could say that, but keep in mind there's somebody else from another group of black folk that could be saying the same thing about you. And often these same people that deny Kamala Harris, they complain about being denied their blackness by Africans. And what's the conversation? The conversation sounds exactly the same. Well, you ain't pure African. You ain't pure black. You got some of the white man's blood in you. That's exactly how the conversation goes. And would that be smart or would that be stupid in the context of racial discrimination, combating racism? Would that be a intelligent, helpful view, realistic or practical view of blackness? Or would that be foolish and ignorant? You be the judge, but you can't have it both ways. I hope you can understand what I'm saying. I hope that was a useful message. And again, this goes even if you don't want to vote for Kamala Harris, even if you don't want to, this conversation still exists. You're going to have this conversation every single day of the week until you get it right. And people who are against you are going to have, who are not black also possibly, are going to have this conversation every single day of the week. And they're going to have a different spin on it. So it behooves us to get it right, so we get what we need out of the conversation, so that we're making practical advantages and forward movement rather than backwards movement. You see, um, we want to represent the multitude, right? The vast majority of people that have these experiences, not the minority of people that have these experiences, right? Um, and they mentioned something interesting here also. Let me just go back to this real quick. There was one other thing. They mentioned intersectionality here. There it is, intersectionality, complex identities. Now, I don't know if you saw the news media pivot to this term complex, right? But it's very obvious that there's a lot of people that don't know why they did that. There's a lot of people that don't know why they did that. This is what they're getting at: complex identities. And again, this is only one example of a complex identity. Trust me when I say that, because you could find yourself uh, an African American from New York being at odds with an African American from Los Angeles because of complex identities, or from Atlanta because of complex identities, even within Blackness, which would seem minute to others. Others might be like, damn, what's wrong with these people? Why are they having these issues? Well, there's some differences about the Black experience from the North and from the South. There's some intersectionality there because you're from New York, and New York is an identity reference, versus you being from Atlanta. That's also an intersectionality. You see, region, class, right? There's some nuances there. Complex identity. While Black is considered a race, individuals' experience of racism can be influenced by their ethnicity, nationality, gender, and other aspects of identity. Think about that when they're speaking about Kamala Harris. For example, an African American might face different forms of discrimination compared to a Black immigrant from Haiti or Black person from the UK. Now, think about that. We say that all the time. Your experience is different from ours. Yes, but it works the other way too. Your experience with Blackness is different from theirs. So I can't say you're not Black. You can't say I'm not Black, because then it all works backwards against all of us. It works backwards against African Americans. You know, it's so funny. I'm gonna close this one out. I'm gonna close this one out. I was working at a production company here, and distribution company in Denmark at one time, and one of my coworkers. I was taking the train back to the city, and one of my coworkers said to me that when he was talking to me, he said, he was talking about racism in Denmark, talking about, and he used the word Negro. And then he looked at me and he said, Victor, African Americans aren't Negroes because they're mixed. And I looked at him in my brain. I was like, this is what the hell did this, what the hell is this dude talking about? This crazy ass is going back into his bag of tricks, because this is, you got to understand this. There's other people out there that think that, oh, African, that think you're different from Africans racially. Do you understand that? And you say it. Many of these African Americans, like Tariq Nasheed and all of them, they say this all the time, that they are different. So why don't they understand it? See, so we have to get more examples of how this works so we can get a well-rounded view of what the hell we're talking about. Because the truth of the matter is that the reason why they said that is because this person said that is because he wanted to call one person a nigger while he was willing to not call the African American a nigger. That was the context of the conversation. He could understand why you wouldn't call an African American a nigger versus why you should be able to call an African a nigger in this country. That's the context of why he said, African Americans aren't pure Negroes. There you have it, folks. So I'm out. I hope you understand that. I hope the conversation was helpful. Don't let your phobia get control your ability to navigate conversations. And I appreciate everybody. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I'm out.